Hey everybody, welcome to another epic episode of the production channel. My name's Stephen Bowles.
Epic.
And I'm
Epic episode.
joined by clearly the other guy, Clem Harrod. Welcome, Clem.
What's up? The other guy in the house.
Other guy. What's going on, Clem? What's going on in your world?
Oh, man. Dude, guys trip, girls trip. My wife just did her thing with my daughter. You know, the previous episode, CJ and I went on a guys trip. Now my wife and my daughter went on a girls trip. CJ's got baseball playoffs going on. You know, it's real in the burbs, man. It's real.
Down in the burbs, the Tampa burbs. That's crazy, dude. I actually, my whole team, we were just out at NAB and loved it. It was a blast. Actually, it's funny. Whenever you guys listen to this podcast episode, whenever it's released, you'll be able to figure out how far off that was from NAB. But anyways, we had a blast out there in Las Vegas. The whole team of Showflow, basically 4 or 5 of us were out there, and we killed it, man. It was a blast. The market loved it, and it was just kind of a fun experience to be not on the like show op position, but to actually be more in the vendor position for a show. It was kind of a nice little change of pace.
Yeah, I get it, man. I get it. You know, and that's what's great about, you know, you all and Showflow being a title sponsor for the production channel. You know, we're out here making this world happen and doing our jobs and enjoying life. And then we've got great companies and people like Showflow sponsoring the production channel, man. It's
yeah,
great.
And we're happy to do it. It's something that, again, I say it every time, but the goals and kind of what we're trying to do on the software side in terms of just kind of trying to help production teams do their, you know, make their workflow a little easier. It's the same goals we've got over here, you know, Clem, that you and I share with Production Channel, which is we just want to bring good stories from the market, from the industry, so that people can learn and see and sort of grow and figure out, all right, I hear how, you know, Clem handled this situation this way. I might be able to apply that in my world as well too, or just at the end of the day, get insights and visibility into how this whole industry is kind of functioning and growing. And so, absolutely. But being able to sponsor the production channel is something that we love to do and are happy to be able to do.
All right, Stephen, this is another show, man. We're doing it again, and we are joined this time with producer and project lead Max Monsegue. She is an amazing woman. She is. Max, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. Thanks for having me.
And we all know each other. I mean, we've done plenty of shows for IBM and Drury Design together and just kind of gone through, as Steve likes to say, the trenches together.
Correct.
I've been in the trenches with you before. Yes, I have.
Yes. And we've seen what those trenches look like, so.
Yes.
And we've survived them. How about that? Ready to live another day, tell another story.
We live to talk about it today, so.
So Max, how did you find the world of live event production? How did you find this industry?
Sort of fell into it hanging out with a mutual friend, a mutual project lead. I don't know if you guys, I know you guys know Suzette Wilson, but she and I have been friends for 20-something years, and we just used to hang out and party together. And she said, hey, we need someone to do some travel on a project. Didn't know what it meant. And then I did travel for 3 weeks. This was like January 1996. And after that, it turned into a career.
And how did you and Suzette meet?
We're both from Trinidad and Tobago. So we used to do a lot of limes or fetes in Brooklyn. Mm-hmm. So we hung out a lot, partying and having a good time. And at the time, I was finishing up a degree at F.I.T. and also out of work. So she was, you know, offering to give me a little bit of work in between degrees. And so I said, sure, I'll do it. Didn't know anything about what this business was, to be quite honest. It's something you sort of don't know exists until you fall into it. I don't think many people go to school to say, let me study this.
Right.
So it just turned out that way. And then they, you know, let me go on site with them that January to San Francisco. I tried to quit 6 months later. I was like, bye. I'm a design student. I don't want to do this. So I was basically, you know, waving them off and saying goodbye. And then they said, we'll call you for work. You know, we'll call you if we have work here and there. And It was a Friday when I said goodbye. It was a Monday when they called me. So,
Oh, wow.
so yes, it was really hard to say goodbye. And then, I tried to step away again. After 7 years, I was like, okay, really, I don't want to do this. My background's in art and design. I want to be creative. I want to do something creative. And so I just kind of try to pull away again. And, as you can see, January will make 22 years.
Oh,
So
my goodness,
there's
yeah.
not much saying goodbye in this business, at least as far as I'm concerned, because I've made
Yeah.
several attempts to not call this my career. But I think eventually I embraced it, just by figuring out how to balance things and how to enjoy what I do.
Wow. So
That's
FIT,
awesome.
what is the FIT stand for? What is the name of that school?
Fashion Institute of Technology.
Wow.
So it is the official design school in the U.S., in New York especially, because that's the melting pot of the fashion industry.
So you were doing fashion design, or that's what the plan was originally?
That was the plan. I actually went to high school, the high school right down the street on 24th Street. I went to high school for fashion design. So it wasn't just let me figure this out in college. It was, I really had my mind geared toward design, 4 years of high school. My mom said after high school, get a business degree. It's like the fashion industry is flaky. So I did that for 2 years, and I looked at her and I said, okay, I still want to do design. And the business school actually prepared me for Drury more than anything. That's where I got my start. But FIT was it's still a block away from Drury's office. So it was really, really good, because even between degrees, they allowed me to sort of work. So if I had a 9 to 11 a.m. class, I would come in after. If I had a class at lunch or after work. And so they were really flexible with me. When I finished my first degree, they were flexible with me continuing on. So
It's funny that you say that. I'm thinking about, when some people are in college and in school, they might be working at McDonald's, or they're working at a clothing store or something, or just not as much training as you're getting, and being able to, your first
Right.
job was San Francisco, you said?
that was my first job in this industry, yes.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting, pretty cool.
Yeah.
So would you say that your job now is more of a system and process type job, or or are you allowed to be creative in it?
It's a combination, and I think part of that was, is having the confidence to have input or have feedback, or be able to share your feedback on certain things. In the beginning, I didn't know what I didn't know, so it felt like I was more process oriented, pushing papers, creating stuff, and I was surrounded by creative people like writers, directors, actors, and all of that. And once you reach a place where you can, have some sort of input on something, when a creative director is sharing the process with you, or having a conversation with you, or artists or designers are asking you, you and not just you, but meaning, asking an opinion, and you can have an opinion and it counts. I think it helps bring out the creative side of me a bit, because I still have an eye for that.
Right.
Did you ever actually design any products that have made it out, or is that kind of all that's really, you went in favor of shows entirely and never kind of moved on that, like even on a hobby at all? Or
It did. That's that first 7 years when I tried to quit. I did. I literally quit the industry for the summer, and I worked with a photographer just trying to get back in the industry, and I started working as a stylist, and she was worried she couldn't pay me, and I'm like, trust me, don't worry about money. And I started building my portfolio as a stylist. And then it actually led to work. It led to work with other photographers, led to work with some magazines. I got tear sheets. One magazine, after working with a certain designer, wanted me to do their fashion show. So it did start leading to other work, but it was also fighting to get paid. So it was one of those things where I have a career. All of a sudden, I'm embracing the career in this industry. I was like, I have a career. I'm not waking up to fight to get paid to do this, this side of the fashion, when I have a career in production. And if you're not going to pay me, I'm going to continue. Or if you're not going to pay me at least what I make in my career, I'm not going to wake up to do the job. So I know I sound like Naomi Campbell.
Right. Now you're like, I don't need this. I got a job. This
Exactly.
is
I
just a
don't wake up
hobby.
for more
I get
than
paid.
10,000 a day. I think that was Naomi Campbell's quote. I don't get out of bed for more than 10,000, whatever the quote was. But
Oh my
yeah,
gosh.
I was like, yeah, I'm not waking up out of bed for this. You know, if it's this difficult I enjoy it, but if it's this difficult to get paid, I'm gonna go what I know.
Right.
And I know the
Right.
production industry, and I know that I can trust the companies I work at, and I'm going to get paid for what I do, and I'm going to get appreciated and not undercut. So I think that really made the decision after the 7 years to really fully come back and embrace this business. And then it still took a couple of years again before, like I said, I could have any creative input in things. So I mean, but I've been on all sides of it, because I've also produced videos, I've produced candids, I've produced videos for shows at different companies. So that has allowed me to also have a creative side as well. So
Yeah.
That makes sense. And then, so then with your transition, or even your entry level positions into the production industry, which, by the way, I think, just for clarification for anyone who's been listening, we've been referencing Drury, which is like Drury Design. They're out in New York City, great firm that all three of us have worked for before, and they do some, just tier one level shows, the big kind of corporate events and product launches, things like that. So when you were working with them and under Suzette, which that's actually pretty, I mean, that's the best case scenario, is that you kind of come in under somebody who's kind of already at that established level. Were you PAing? I mean, what was kind of the first couple of years of production? What was your first exposure in? Was it like, what was your role on these shows?
it was, the first 2 years actually, 2 years in a row, 1996 and 97, we did go to San Francisco for a farmer show. And it was definitely peeing. Like I said, that when I first started, I did travel for like 100 or something people. When they took me on
Jeez.
site to San Francisco, they put me in it was like one of those rooms with these fun creative rotations and, tool time and all these different things. And I was in a game room, which was where they had their recess, so to speak. Felt more like a college campus. And they put me in a room to PA it. I didn't know anything about this business, but at least the room just had Dove bars and popcorns and dartboards. So it still didn't help me understand this industry at all. And then once back in New York, I would, make photocopies back in the day of show books, when we really had scripted books and these big binders. And so standing at the copy machine, copying off scripts, I started just looking at it, just looking at the scripts and seeing, okay, there's the dialogue, there's the actor, the talent, there's the presenter. And so that really let me understand a little bit more about what was happening, what the meeting was, what was happening on stage. And I was doing that for a good while. And then I think it was 1998. I remember it was the summer, and they asked me if I wanted to train to be an associate producer. And I said, sure. Didn't know what that meant either, but okay, sure. So they started training me to be an associate producer. And at that time, I was still at F.I.T. So I was still working on a degree and training to be an associate producer at the same time, which just elevated responsibilities and meant more than just making photocopies at that point. Then I started working on agendas and schedules, and that starts to help you understand a show much more than just looking at the scripts, because when you're building an agenda from the ground up, then you get a sense of what's supposed to happen from soup to nuts for that client, and what they're expecting. And then once you see it come off the papers, that was the most exciting part for me as well, was seeing something that was laid out on paper come to life. And that's always the most satisfying part for me, is actually seeing it happen and then having it happen successfully. And there's always that feeling once it's done, even if it's exhausting, it's just such an accomplishment, because you have to remember it started as a concept on paper.
Right.
Yeah.
I feel the same way as a projectionist, looking at somebody else's rendering and looking at the equipment list and thinking about how all those parts and pieces are going to come together to build the rendering that we see and then make it into the real life. So I can totally understand that perspective of yours, or that point of view, that appreciation for that. What is some of the challenges that you face, though, with that, in like maybe not specific situations, but like with dealing with clients and trying to get that timeline or get that information to create a show?
I think the biggest challenge, and it depends on the industry, some industries if it's pharma or other things, they know who's going to present. It's always going to be a VP of marketing, all that, so they know who's going to present. They may not know who's going to own what piece of it, how much, if, politics come into place, who's going to speak for 20 minutes versus 30. Those are some of the things that you run across. In some other industries where, you rely on customers and guest speakers and all of that, that's the hard part of building the agenda, right? Because then you don't have who you want confirmed. You have an idea of who you want to speak, but the agenda is not solid until you can confirm all the presenters. And that's, I think, the biggest challenge, because that can sometimes continue to be a moving target. And until that's nailed, that's the first thing that has to be nailed. What is the agenda? Because you have a finite window to make this happen. And if you don't lay it on paper, and sometimes they lay it on paper, and I'm like, you're running over on paper before anyone even created presentations or opened their mouth. So if you're running over on paper, by the time we create the show, you're really over.
Right,
so,
once the ad-libbing happens.
Exactly. So my job is always like, I start looking at that, because even when they build their agendas, they don't build the transitions and the breaks. It's like, if I have 90 minutes, this is 5 minutes, this person's 15, 20, 30, and it's like, and there's the full 90. And I'm like, well, wait a minute, you haven't built time for people to get on and off stage. You haven't built videos. You haven't built play-ons. You haven't built those things. And, when we take their agenda and plug it in and make them realize you have to trim back, and then after you trim back, because you can't start creating content. You can't tell someone, hey, I put 30 minutes in the agenda, and when we do the agenda for real, you really only have 20, 25, and you don't want that presenter to start building their content based on an incorrect timing. So the agenda becomes key to keeping everything on track before you can even start thinking you can build content from there.
Now, when do you start building? Like, if a show is, say, April of next year, when would you start building at? How many months out?
It depends on the size of the show. So it really all depends. If it's a fairly large show, the agenda building still doesn't come together till later. You'll know the time slots, you'll know it's 90, you'll know maybe a high level exec. But, the agenda, even though we're helping to build it, it's totally dependent on the client, right? So they have to get to a certain point where they know what they want to convey. They need to know what their overall message is and who's going to deliver that. And so they have to figure those parts out before we can start. I just got put on a project that's next Friday, in New Jersey. It's just an internal employee meeting. I still don't have an agenda, right? So, and it's this week, last week I said, okay, let's 8 combo mics. Oh, that's overkill. Okay, by the time we got through the call with the client, there were 4 lavs and 4 handhelds. But my 8 combo mics the week before was overkill. But okay, and then I would say, okay, well, that person isn't speaking anymore. Okay, you send me a final agenda next week. I will do the lav information so we know who's getting lavs, who's getting trade-offs, all of that. But that's an example of, it's not a complicated, it's just an internal employee show, and it's the agenda, if I get it this week, is not going to kill me. Now, we're not creating the content for them, right? They're creating it for themselves, some of it based off of a meeting they just did last week in Atlanta. If it's a more complicated show, a bigger show, and there are other things happening in and around it, before, after, simultaneous, all those things, the agenda has to be built, weeks in advance. When I say weeks, more than 8, 10, 12, longer, if possible, but sometimes we're at the 8-10 week mark where we're still trying to get agendas finalized. So our ideal world would be, yes, a month or 2 out, but it doesn't always happen.
Yeah. And Stephen, just thinking, as she's saying that, I'm thinking about how, like, that's at the agenda level. Well, think about once the booking happens and it comes down to the production companies and stuff, when they're trying to book out the labor, and then things get cut back, and then our days, which were 10 days, now become 6 days and stuff. Like, it's just a whole trickle down process.
Correct.
The ripple effects of some CEO somewhere, changing his plan of attack during his 30-minute session has macro effects, across the budget, et cetera. Yeah, totally.
Correct. And that's very key what you're saying, because in a project early in the year, it was the same kind of thing. By the time I get to talent director, he was like, well, I was booked, through Thursday. And I'm like, well, the show's done Tuesday. Like, maybe
Right.
back when you were put on, we were given a broad agenda by the client, but now we're
Mm-hmm.
in it. Show finishes on Tuesday. There is nothing Wednesday, Thursday. And you're right. It
Yeah.
becomes that trickle when people are sort of already booked. And then you realize like the agenda's changed so much that it impacts people's in and out times.
But and it
Yeah.
also impacts people's income. Like, how can
Right.
we
Mm-hmm.
adjust that overall and affect that to make it better for everybody else? You understand?
Right.
Like planning our lives and stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, especially if you turn down work too, because it's like, well, I thought I was done Thursday and I had now I'm done Tuesday and I had an opportunity that I said no to where I could have started Thursday or been at this other project starting Thursday, but I said no because I thought I was going until Thursday. You know what I mean? So it becomes
Yeah.
that side that many of us, even as a producer and a project leads holding the budget, we don't know for every single person on the team what other commitments they have out there or what other commitments they may have turned down because something has shifted in the scheduling.
So I got a question for you. In talking about the pre-production process, like you're talking about, where like 8 to 12 weeks out for the agenda is ideal, so you can kind of get your arms around what it is and just the amount of moving pieces and reordering, etc., that happens just leading up to the show. But then, yeah, like Clem was saying, for us, we're maybe looking at a handful of emails ahead of time, but for the most part, our life begins and ends, on the show days, right? Or whatever, the on-site days. And so, like, talk to us a little bit about how you can guide that ship from paper and email, right, to real life people, real world, like in and outs every single day in terms of in and out times. CEOs that want to play golf in the morning but have a rehearsal in the afternoon. Like, share with us that I know it's complex. I've been on shows that you've been on, and I'm just going, holy cow! You listen to the production and producing management team just running around trying to actively reorganize the day because they know the impacts of, what 30 minutes off by a rehearsal means 4 hours of OT here. Just kind of share with us how you navigate that,
I mean, we try to do as much as we can ahead of time. I think we try earlier and earlier to get executive schedules, and even if we might have it on paper, we don't know what the client always communicates to the presenters. Sometimes they hold that information for so long where we build an ideal schedule that says this is when, based on when we know we can get in the room, after we've set up, after we've loaded, after we've done what we need to do to tech and be ready for you, this is what we can do. And then oftentimes you find out, oh, well, so-and-so is not flying in until the next day. You mean the day of show? Or so-and-so lands 8 o'clock at night. They want to rehearse, or yeah, I mean, you have them rehearsing on Saturday instead of Sunday, but they want to play golf, and we try to figure that out so far in advance, and that's why we push to get the schedules out to the client and let us know, are there conflicts? What's going on? What other things are happening? Even if it's not golf, sometimes these high-level execs have press conferences, they have other meetings, they have meetings with customers, they have other things scheduled on site that we may not be aware of. So we try to get a full look at the schedule so we can place them in before we know there's an impact. And if there is an impact, it's something we do bring up to the client teams that do manage the budget. It's like, okay, well, this is where we are, and here are the options. Crew is finishing at 11 if we do this. We have a 6 a.m. call. Here's the impact. Everyone's in double time the next day until we're done. We try and present all these things ahead of time and say so, and empower them to sort of, what do you want us to do? We're happy to do anything, but some things come at a price and at a cost. And then so we sort of try and work within whatever direction, they want to work in. Sometimes they present that to, the client, and it's like, okay, well, great, I'll pay for it. Or sometimes it's like, you know what, I'll adjust something, or maybe we'll do it earlier, and then we'll worry about, things after. Sometimes we're not rehearsing in order. Sometimes we're wedging someone in before we're really ready because that's the window we have, So it's just a lot of, moving parts. when we do that, but we definitely try to, pre-vet that kind of information to avoid some of those catastrophes on site, because it has happened. And so now learning from it, you really try and figure it out before you get on site.
Now, how much pushback sometimes, or do you have at times with the budget? After telling the client, hey, this is what this is going to cost if we have to change everything in the overtime and the double time. And then, okay, show's over. Now, final numbers are sent in, the final invoice. What's that process? How the stress on that, or do you deal with that?
It's usually not stressful, because when it is approved, I don't know if you remember you remember, Clem, the projection ordeal on this last one with that prompter thing in the back and raising it and lowering it. And then it was like, and the client kept saying, well, how much? And I explained, and then it was like, well, can we see it in before we approve? I said, well, no, once the labor has to move it, and then we need a new projector. So once we do it, the money's spent. So this is how much it's going to be. Do we have approval to do it? I can't do it and then wait for you to approve the cost. And then they finally said, okay. And so once that's done, and I wasn't in charge of the budget on that one, so I go to the project lead on that one and I say, this is what the client just approved. Do me a favor, send them an email right now and say, great, you approved XYZ, and we'll send you a PCN for that, which is a project change notice. So what we try and do is the minute we get an approval on something, document it. If a client's really difficult, there are times where I have to go in a budget, create that PCN, send it to them to sign off on in an email verbally. Back in the day, we used to be like, sign here, sign the document. So that way, because the person
sounds miserable.
The person signing it isn't the procurement person at the end of it who's not even on site for their company. So it becomes important to document who's approved it and when, because that approval makes it easier when it's done. They're not like, what does this cost? And it's a surprise. That definitely doesn't happen. There's no like, oh yeah, it'll cost you double time and then are you okay? We present a cost. So even when they say, well, what does that mean? Then we have to look at the crew that's in the ballroom. It's going to be the AV crew, the talent, the product, every side of it, and say, this is what it's going to cost. And we give them a number. We just don't tell them it's going to cost you more.
Gotcha.
That's fascinating. That's a whole world that we don't really interact with much, because we're just sitting there, which is interesting, by the way. But like as show crew, when we take on a gig, we sort of just unofficially are signing our entire schedule for the day, and we aim for you aim for a 10-hour, but if you guys want to make a whole series of decisions like you just described that are happening in rooms we don't know, and it just comes back out the other end and says, sweet, move the projector. And for us that means, okay, tonight or tomorrow morning, and you're like, well, we have rehearsals in the morning, so that means tonight. And for us, we just lost everything till 11 p.m. And so and we understand that is kind of, or if anyone doesn't understand that, they learn real quick. That's kind of the way that world works.
Did you think you were going to go have cocktails?
Well, I mean, no, but that's the thing. It's two different sides to it, because it's like either it's my financial pleasure to be here, or it was like, oh, this has been such a draining day. I was just looking forward to leaving. It's like
exactly.
Yeah.
Oh, we're all in that ship, honey. So.
Yeah, exactly. We're all in it.
You don't get to go have cocktails
until you get to go have cocktails. But now with that though, Max, okay, on a show site, and you mentioned earlier about the CEO or whomever gets to play golf. When do you get downtime on a show, or right after a show? Do you stay longer? How does that work for you?
I typically don't stay longer unless it's someplace I've never been, someplace great out of the country, whatever it is. I will definitely stay longer to explore that city. Otherwise, no, I want to get out, get home, get back to my normal life.
Get on with your life.
Sleep in my own bed. So you guys know that you're on the road more than anything, but I want to sleep in my own bed. I want to be in my own space. So I definitely get out. We do not get downtime when we're there. I haven't done a show in a long time where there's a dark day. There used to be a show where it was one of those reward shows, and it was a month long, and so that offered dark days because you're repeating the same show over and over to different audiences, and you're on location for a month. But typical shows that last a week, Definitely there's no dark days or downtime. The schedule is
Mm-hmm.
packed throughout, and really not, the client isn't looking at our schedule, they're looking at more bang for their buck for their schedule. If I'm bringing my
Mm-hmm.
attendees, my employees, my customers, whoever it is, out of their offices where they're not making money, they're not earning, they're not selling, whatever it is, depending on the audience, to bring them to an event, I'm going to maximize that time, and I'm going to try and fill the calendar
Yeah.
with as much meetings as possible, even if I haven't figured out the transition times in between. Because
Yeah.
sometimes, those things are out of our hands too. We're only look in charge of what's happening in our space. And next thing you know, you're like, well, we're starting 10, 15 minutes late. Why? Because they schedule lunch to overlap by 30 minutes. Why? Because there's another schedule that's running 30 minutes over, and that audience needs to come in.
Yes.
There's a lot of those buffers that are not built in because they try and just really, compact their schedule with their attend. And there are times where you're on the other side and you're like, my gosh, it's like, this is a lot. If it's a lot for us, I can't imagine even being an attendee on the other side of it, where you're going from one
Mm-hmm.
thing to
Mm-hmm.
the next. Then there's a reception at night. And then you get up the
Mm-hmm.
next morning. So their schedules are just as exhausting. So I don't think anyone thinks about or bills downtime, because it's really about trying to maximize the fact that you've taken them out of their office. Let's get everything in that we can get in.
Right. Now, speaking of maximizing time, pun intended.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Ooh.
when you're not on show site and when you're at home, how do you maximize your time there? What do you do to escape that world of production but enjoy your time?
I'm an avid runner. I mean, I run 4 to 5 days a week,
Mm.
and I even try and do it when I'm on the projects. It's very rare when it gets really crazy, and then I'm waking up early and early, and then it's like, okay, I'm not running at 5 in the morning in the dark by myself. But it reaches that point where I'm pushing myself to get up early and earlier, just to get that run in before the first conference call, or before the emails start taking hold. So, I mean, definitely that's my outlet.
Mm-hmm.
I do work out 3 to 5 days a week. I mean, 3 days a week. So in the evenings, that's something that I do in the evenings and weekends. So I really try and carve that out in between. And there are other things like hobbies that I'll pick up here and there, and then I'll put it down. I had a French tutor for a while last year. I had a piano, instructor 2 or 3 years ago. Still have a keyboard sitting here in Houston, and I had one when I had my apartment in New York. So I had two keyboards, because I was constantly taking my lessons and going back and practice. I did volleyball for a good while, and then I, messed up my finger. It was like really 90-degree bend on it. So
Oh.
that's why I put the piano down for a while too, because my fingers were not straight after jamming it. So I never went back to volleyball, but I also haven't played my keyboards since. But I do try and fill my time with just things to do out here in Houston, and I'm very much more outdoorsy. So I try and do things that allow me to be outside, because without that recharge, I can't come back and do what I do. And I actually had to learn that myself. I didn't always know how to have work-life balance. I travel a lot still, even when I'm not working. So unless I carve that out for myself, I can't come back and do what I do. I can't recharge. I can't enjoy it if I just constantly keep going.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think it was Easter. I saw some posts of like tug of war and some games that you were
Yes.
playing with some family and friends. I'm sure that was a
Yes.
blast.
That was the first time we did that, and that was definitely a blast. But yeah, so those are those moments that I sort of live for, because at the end of the day, as much as I love what I do,
Mm-hmm.
um, the things that we hold tight to as we get older, our memories, our family, the things that we share are going to be those moments spent with family and friends, where you're not thinking about work, where you're putting it down for a minute or a couple of minutes, so that you can enjoy what the rest of life is meant for.
Yeah.
I always say at the end of the day, I love what I do. And I know there's so many people, so many great friends that I've met in this industry. And I'm like, many of who will come to my funeral, I mean, send flowers, and many may come to my funeral. But at the end of the day, make no mistake, I will be replaced by someone else if a project needs to happen. And it's my family and my friends that I become invaluable to. So I have to have that time with them, and with myself, to just recharge, because it's more important than what I do. What I do doesn't define who I am. It just allows me to be able to come back and do what I do successfully, and also in a great space, in a great headspace.
Well, Max, I will have to say that I know Stephen, I'm speaking for Stephen and I both, and probably for many people in the industry, we have all enjoyed working with you and looking forward to the next show and having you by our side, and not even just by our side, but as our lead. And yeah, we appreciate it, and we appreciate you taking your time to being on the show today.
Great. Thank you guys for having me. This was really great.
All right, Ballsy. Next time, buddy.